Trimming half square triangles is something that shows up in quilt patterns, and if you're a beginner quilter, you might not understand what you're supposed to do or why you should be doing it. I have a whole lot of half square triangles to trim today, so I'm going to do a little demo of various ways to trim half square triangles using different kinds of tools. But before we get started, let's talk about why you even need to trim in the first place. I have two half square triangles here. This one has been sewn and then pressed and nothing else, and then this one has been trimmed. In the pattern that I'm making, the half square triangle, when it's sewn into the quilt, will be 2 inches square. That means before it gets sewn into the quilt, it needs to be 2.5 inches square. That allows for the 1/2 inch seam on each side. Your quilt pattern will probably give these two measurements, but it's important when you're trimming them, especially when you're using some of the rulers, to know what size you're aiming for. So even though this is a 2-inch finished size half square triangle, I'm only trimming it to 2.5 inches so that I have enough fabric for those seams. If I need to have 2.5-inch half square triangles, why have I made it bigger? Why did the pattern create a half square triangle that's bigger than it needs to be? Well, that's because half square triangles tend to be a little wonky. You can see that when I line up this diagonal line that should go from corner to corner on a half square triangle with this ruler, the edges aren't really that straight. They're kind of wonky. That's why a lot of quilting patterns specify that you should make them a little bigger and then trim them down. I used to really resent having to trim my half square triangles, but as I've done more quilting and learned to really slow down and enjoy the process, I actually kind of like the whole process of squaring them up. And as well, I really like the fact that when they're nice like this with the points in the middle and the right size, the rest of the piecing goes so much easier. Now, obviously, you don't want to have to buy a ruler for every size of half square triangle that you're ever going to make. So I'm going to show you how to trim it using your regular quilting ruler first, and then one of the specialty rulers that I have. First thing is I'm going to start with the seam across like this. It'll become apparent why in just a minute. The next thing is to line up the 45-degree line on your ruler, the one that goes straight into the point, with that seam on your half square triangle. By doing this, you're making sure that the little point of your half square triangle, the seam goes directly to the point, which will give you nice sharp points when you're doing the rest of the piecing of your block. The next step is knowing what the unfinished size of your half square triangle should be. In my case, it's 2.5 inches. So I'm going to line up this line here, and then I'm going to make sure that there's a little extra right here beyond 2.5 inches so that I have room to trim this side after I trim this side. And the reason that I have it horizontal like this is because this is just a little more ergonomic. I can cut this way and then I actually twist my body over to the left. You can sort of see my elbow moved here, and then I can do this side. So that's one side, nice and straight and neat corner. We're going to flip it over like this to the other side and do the exact same thing, except this time you're going to line up the line and then line up to your finished sides. These are the finished edges that you just cut. So those are the final edges, and now we're going to cut these two final edges. And again, we can cutting from the left and then take a step to the right, and then you can cut straight away from your body as well. So now you can see we have two perfect half square triangles. That is the first way to cut them, and the one that really makes the most logical sense to people when they're first doing it. Another way people trim half square triangles is to trim them before they press them. And in this case, we're going to be paying attention to lining up this seam line, not the edge of the fabric, but the seam line, because that is the seam line, right? And again, to make it easier to cut, I'm going to turn this way. And then I'm going to line up 2.5 inches right here on the seam line and the same down here on the seam line. And it's going to take a little bit of playing to get them both on the seam line. And if you were doing a lot of these, I would advise putting a line of tape between these two marks. It would make it a whole lot easier to line things up. But for this case, I'm just doing one this way to demonstrate it, and I'm going to cut these. So there's only going to be one set of 2 cuts. Once it's pressed, it's going to open up and be the exact same size as this, 2.5 inches square, but there will be these little tails here on these corners. And you can just clip them off like this. So, less cutting of the sides, you only do that one cut, but you have to cut the tails off. And that's really a preference for you to figure out for yourself. Do it a few different ways and figure out. The last thing I'm going to show you is using a different kind of ruler. There are a lot of different rulers out there to trim half square triangles, but they generally do it in the same 2 ways. This ruler can do it 2 ways. The first way is very similar to using the big square ruler. It has a way to line this up here. I'm lining this up on a line here. And this ruler actually uses finished sizes. So you can see here it says 2 inches here instead of 2.5. But the same thing applies. You're going to line up the diagonal and then you're going to cut 2 sides, flip it around, line up the diagonal and the finished size, just like that, and cut 2 sides. The other more popular way to use this ruler is on unpressed half square triangles, again using the seam line. And I'm going to line this seam line up with a line on the ruler. And again, this ruler is referring to finished sizes, so that's 2 inches finished. And again, I can trim the 2 sides. But again, when you do this, you're going to have the little edges here. This ruler has something on the bottom so that you can trim these. I'm still using a ruler rather than scissors separately. Again, there's a line here to line up on there, and I can trim that. And trim that. And then when it's pressed open, those little dog ears are trimmed off for you. I have seen that there are rulers out there that have ways to have a little slot to trim them so you do not have to move your ruler and do something separately. I haven't used those rulers. I'm a big fan of creative grid rulers though, because they slide really easily until you put a little bit of pressure on them, and then they do not slide. So I hope that helps you understand about why you need to trim your half square triangles and also how to do that. I will say that my favorite way is that very first way I showed you. I like that everything gets trimmed off, and it's very peaceful for me to just sit and trim half square triangles. I hope this helps. Happy sewing!